The Bankstown Tragedy, Vietnamese woman kidnapped and burned alive in Australia. The call from Greenacre Road. It was just past 10:30 p.m. on April 17th, 2025, when the silence of a Bankstown neighborhood was shattered. Australia's emergency hotline just received a frantic call from a trembling teenage boy. On the other end of the line, his voice broke with panic. His mother had been dragged away by armed men who had broken into their home on Greenacre Road. Within minutes, sirens wailed through the streets. Neighbors, still half asleep, recalled later that they'd heard screams echoing through the night, followed by a loud crash and the sound of an engine speeding off into the distance. By the time officers arrived, the scene was chaos. The front door smashed, furniture overturned, glass scattered across the floor. A 15-year-old boy sat trembling in shock near the hallway, his hands streaked with blood that wasn't his own. In the corner of the living room, his 8-year-old brother lay unconscious with a deep wound to his head. The boy's desperate cries filled the house as paramedics rushed in, their radios crackling with tension. "He just kept saying, 'They took my mom, they took my mom,'" one responder later recalled. The children were taken to Liverpool Hospital. Doctors confirmed the younger boy had suffered a severe traumatic brain injury, likely from being struck with a blunt weapon. Emergency surgery was performed as he slipped into a coma. The older brother, though physically unharmed, was too traumatized to speak for hours. Meanwhile, detectives combed through the wreckage of the house. Bloodstains, shattered frames, and footprints painted a grim picture of what had unfolded. It was clear. This wasn't a random burglary. Whoever had done this came prepared, coordinated, and merciless. Just over an hour later, at 11:30 p.m., a new call reached emergency dispatch. ATCH. Residents in Beverly Hills, roughly 5 miles away, reported a car engulfed in flames at the dead end of Welfare Avenue, a quiet street bordering a small park. Fire crews arrived to find a black SUV consumed by fire, the heat so intense it warped nearby metal fences. When the blaze was finally subdued, investigators approached the smoldering wreck and froze. In the back seat, beneath twisted steel and ash, lay the burned remains of a human body. The air turned heavy as realization dawned. Could this be the missing woman from Bankstown? Detectives quickly cordoned off the scene. The vehicle identification number was barely legible, the license plates removed, every trace seemingly erased by fire. Yet the timing, location, and circumstances made one thing almost certain. This was no coincidence. That night, while much of Sydney slept, a special task force was quietly formed under the name Strike Force Bushfield. Their mission? To uncover who had abducted and killed this woman, and why. By dawn, the neighborhood that once knew peace was blanketed with police tape, news crews, and questions no one could answer. 2 children lay in hospital beds. Their mother's fate, still too cruel to comprehend, marked the beginning of one of Australia's most chilling modern crimes. The body in the fire. As daylight broke over Sydney, the blackened SUV on Welfare Avenue was still smoldering, a chilling monument to the violence that had unfolded just hours earlier. Forensic officers in white suits moved carefully around the scene, their cameras flashing through the clouds of residual smoke. Every inch of the vehicle was examined, every melted fragment collected. Inside, investigators found a body burned beyond recognition, curled in the back seat where the fire had burned hottest. The discovery was devastating, but for seasoned detectives, the method spoke volumes. This was ours. As no spontaneous act of rage, it was calculated, deliberate, and cruelly symbolic. Nearby, scorched remnants of fabric were found, possibly the victim's clothes, stripped off before the blaze. Beneath the rear door, bullet casings glinted faintly in the ash. Forensic testing would later confirm what police feared. The woman may have been shot before being set alight. The location itself was eerily strategic. Welfare Avenue, a dead-end street bordered by a park and highway, had no through traffic and few residents awake at that hour. Whoever planned this had chosen the perfect spot, isolated, dark, and quiet. Meanwhile, at the Bankstown home, police teams continued their examination. The living room bore signs of a violent struggle: broken glass, overturned chairs, blood stains leading toward the front door. On the floor, officers found a piece of black duct tape, possibly used to gag or restrain the victim. It was carefully sealed and sent to the lab for DNA testing. By mid-morning, the case had already drawn national attention. Reporters crowded outside the crime scenes as detectives pieced together what had happened. The 15-year-old witness, still in shock, told investigators what he remembered. 4 to 5 men dressed in black, wearing masks, carrying handguns, and a baseball bat. They had burst through the door, struck his little brother, and dragged his mother away, half-conscious and terrified. The brutality left even veteran officers shaken. This wasn't just a kidnapping, one detective said. It was an execution planned in advance. Investigators quickly suspected that the woman's abduction and the burned car were connected. Their working theory: the victim in the SUV was the missing mother, but to confirm it, they needed scientific proof. DNA samples were taken from her 2 sons, along with items from the house, to compare with what little tissue remained from the body. While forensic results were pending, detectives began to reconstruct the victim's life. Her name was Mrs. Kim Tran, a 45-year-old Vietnamese Australian woman described by neighbors as quiet, kind, and deeply devoted to her family. She had no known enemies, no record, and no criminal ties. But one fact complicated the picture: her husband was missing. At the time of the attack, Mr. Tong Guan, 45, was reportedly in Queensland on a short business trip. When he received news of the tragedy, he immediately flew back to Sydney, distraught, confused, and desperate for answers. To police, his alibi checked out, but what kind of business had kept him away that night soon became a critical question. Because as investigators dug deeper, they began to suspect the horrifying truth. This wasn't random at all. Mrs. Kim Tran may have been targeted not for who she was, but for who her husband was. The mastermind behind the flames. For nearly a week, Sydney's media buzzed with updates about the Bankstown kidnapping. The public was horrified. A mother abducted from her own home, a child left in a coma, and a body burned beyond recognition in a suburban cul-de-sac. But behind the scenes, detectives were uncovering something even darker. The forensic results arrived on April 2, 2025. DNA samples taken from the burned remains matched both children. The victim was indeed Mrs. Kim Tran. Her death, it turned out, was not a random act of cruelty, but part of a revenge plan rooted in Australia's criminal underworld. When questioned further, Mrs. Tran's husband, Mr. Tong Guan, broke down. He admitted he had ties to a Vietnamese drug network operating between Sydney and Melbourne. For months, he'd been making quiet trips across states to broker methamphetamine shipments worth millions. But one deal went wrong. A massive batch of drugs vanished without explanation. The syndicate accused him of stealing. He swore he didn't. But in the world he was involved in, words meant nothing. To them, betrayal was answered only with blood. Investigators now believed the gang decided to send a message, not to Tong himself, but through the person he loved most. The abduction, the brutality, the fire, all of it was revenge. Phone records later confirmed their suspicions. On the night of the crime, Tong's phone had received a string of text messages, each more chilling than the last. 20 minutes left, 10 minutes, 5 minutes. But Tong never saw them. He was out of signal range. When the kidnappers got no response, they followed through on their threat, murdering his wife and torching the vehicle to destroy all traces. That revelation gave detectives a new direction. Among Tong's known associates, one name appeared repeatedly: Nguyen Nguyen D. An, a 29-year-old Vietnamese Australian who lived just a few blocks from the Tran family. Officially, he was self-employed. Unofficially, he was a trusted middleman in the same drug syndicate. Data from his mobile phone placed him in Bankstown at 10 o'clock p.m. on April 17th, the exact time of the kidnapping. Hours later, his phone reactivated miles away, near the Beverly Hills fire scene. Then came another clue. A large cash deposit appeared in his account 2 days after the murder. Investigators believed this was payment for organizing the hit. By late August, after months of surveillance and evidence gathering, Strikeforce Bushfield moved in. At 5 a.m. on August 28, 25, officers stormed Nguyen D. An's apartment. He was arrested while asleep, stunned, silent, and surrounded by police. When interrogated, he refused to talk, but the evidence was already overwhelming. Later that day, he was formally charged with the murder of Mrs. Kim Tran and attempted murder of her son. Police believe Ann was the mastermind, the one who coordinated 3 hired gunmen still on the run. The investigation has since expanded nationwide, targeting the larger syndicate behind the tragedy. In court, Ann appeared calm, expressionless, and declined bail. His lawyer claimed he was innocent, but to many, the evidence spoke for itself. Today he remains behind bars awaiting trial, while two young boys grow up without their mother. A woman who lived quietly, died brutally, and became the center of one of Australia's most haunting modern crimes. And in the quiet streets of Bankstown, the echoes of that April night still linger, a reminder that sometimes the most peaceful neighborhoods hide the darkest secrets.